Okay, so we're back. We're going to finish up these last three problems. These are your trig equations where they are quadratic, meaning that you have a squared. So this is a second or third sort of set of these trig equations that we want to solve. So we typically solve these by factoring. Remember that you can factor with a GCF or you can factor with the double set of parentheses. So this first example should be a GCF because when I look at this first problem, I can take a cosine and pull it to the front. It's common to both terms. So if I take a cosine out of a 2 cosine squared, that's going to leave me a 2 and a cosine. When I take a cosine out of just a cosine, it's going to leave me a 1. All right, so we're going to pull that cosine to the front. That factors the problem. Then we'll set each part of that equal to 0 and solve. So we've got cosine theta equaling 0. And we have 2 cosine theta plus 1 equaling 0. All right, and we're going to look at solving each one. So the first one's actually solved for us. The second one, I'm going to subtract the 1 from both sides. And then divide by 2. Okay, so where is cosine equal to -1/2? So that would be in the second and the third quadrant. I know that cosine of pi over 3 is the 1/2. So in the second quadrant, that's going to be 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3. And then for cosine equaling 0, I'm probably going to need my graph. All right, so it's equal to 0 at the second point and the fourth point. So remember that's pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. All right, so those are your answers for the first problem here. All right, so looking at our second problem, we notice that we have all cosines, so we should be able to factor this problem into double parentheses. The only way to make 2 cosine squared is going to be 2 cosine theta and 1 cosine theta. All right, to make the 4, we're going to use 1 and 4. You may have to play with this a little bit to get it factored correctly. I'm going to do it this way with a minus here and a plus here. And again, it's a little bit of trial and error here. I did not honestly come up with it right the first time, so be prepared to practice a little bit and multiply it out and make sure that you have it set up correctly. All right, so I'm going to set each of these equal to 0 and then solve. So 2 cosine theta plus 1 equals 0. This is actually the same part that we had in the previous example, so I'm going to subtract the 1, divide by the 2. So we're looking for places where cosine is equal to -1/2. Again, we just did that, so that's going to be 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3. All right, my other one, cosine theta minus 4 is equal to 0. We're going to add 4 to both sides. We get cosine equaling 4. We know that that is never possible because the highest cosine value on the graph is at 1. So this is a no solution, so we pretty much ignore this one. Okay, so the only answers would be 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3 for the second one. Okay, so for the third one, we notice that we have 2 different functions, sine squared and cosine, and in order to factor or work the problem, we have to have the same function. So I'm going to take my identity. So remember your identity that you're going to be using on these are the Pythagorean identities. So you may need to go back and review those, make sure that you know those identities. All right, so I'm going to take this identity, which relates sines and cosines. I'm going to solve for sine squared. So I'm going to subtract the cosine theta from both sides of the expression. We'll just move it over to the right. And that gives me an expression equivalent to sine squared. So I'm going to come here, I'm going to plug it in right here. So 1 minus cosine squared. I'm going to leave the right side alone as it was. And then I'm going to get it ready to factor. And I know that to factor, I've got to have everything on one side. I'm going to move these terms to the right. All right, so when you do that, you're going to have 0 is equal to cosine squared plus 2 cosine theta, and then you're going to have a plus 1. Okay. And then I'm going to try to factor it using my double parentheses. So again, not a lot of choices. The only way to make cosine squared is cosine and cosine. The only way to make 1 is 1 and 1. There are no minuses anywhere in the problem, so it would make sense that they're both going to be pluses. And so we have a double parenthesis that's exactly the same. So I really am only going to have to work this thing out once. I'm going to set it equal to 0. I'll just kind of come over here and do it. So plus 1 is equal to 0. I am going to subtract the 1 from both sides. All right, so again, I'm looking at my graph for cosine. Here's the -1 down here. That is the third point. The third point is pi. And that will be the only solution that we have to this last one. Okay, so just important to remember on the last one, if your functions are not the same, then you need to make some adjustments so that they are before you get into trying to factor that trig equation.